So autonomous cars, they are in the news, they are seemingly right on the horizon. But is that what we should be focusing on? I'm Colin Wright, and you are watching Consider This. I don't mean to imply that autonomous cars are not cool and that they are not worthy of our attention. And I do absolutely think that they're going to have an absolutely massive impact on the way that we do lots of things. But in a lot of ways, they're really not super important, at least not compared to the other discussions that we could be having along that same vein. Consider that if you have autonomous cars, then maybe you don't need parking lots anymore. Because these cars can be continuously going back and forth. They could be Uber style, going out and picking people up continuously. They don't need to sleep, they don't need to rest. Maybe they need to be refueled, but that's something that could be done automatically as well. And so what you have is an always-on fleet of cars that, other than when they're being cleaned and serviced and potentially fueled up, they don't need to stop. Parking spots are for materials that you need to store when they're not being used. But these are devices that will suddenly have much larger utility because they'll be used 24/7. So maybe no parking lots, and maybe that changes the structure of the city. But why do we need roads if we've got autonomous cars? The way that we've got our current roads set up, their width and their material and the regulations, the way that they're painted, the signs on the roads, these are all set up for human drivers. There is no doubt a much more convenient, much more efficient and effective way to orient the spaces in which these autonomous cars can travel. So then how does that then reorient the structure of a city? A lot of the designs I've seen for autonomous cars seem to picture like a car, but maybe without a steering wheel. And so it's people sitting there smiling without a steering wheel, as if the alleviation of the need to drive only changes that one input device. Why wouldn't you have all the chairs facing each other with a table in the middle, like in a living room? Why wouldn't you have the entire car changed from the shape of a car, which it doesn't really need to be that shape anymore, because if it's electric, you don't have to have the motor in the same place. So other than for tradition's sake, why don't you turn the entire thing into like a real living room? Instead of just turning the chairs to face each other and putting a coffee table there, why not make it look like somebody's actual living room and just have these rooms kind of jetting around on these maybe roads, maybe something more futuristic types of surfaces around the city, which will never need to be parked. And so you exit the living room and then somebody else gets in, and the entire structure then of the city changes. Taking it a step further, if you're already moving around in these rooms, why do you ever need to go outside to begin with? Why don't you just have a city that is a continuous kind of serpentine set of paths of like sideways elevators is essentially what these cars turn into. If they are rooms that are moving around the city, what you would do is step from your home into another room that was not there before. You close the door, it moves you where you need to go as you're sitting and watching TV or playing on your smartphone, and then you exit the room into another room that is in a completely new building. The way that it would operate would be somewhat indistinguishable from like stepping into a really fancy elevator and going up within the same building, except in this case, instead, we would be zigzagging around an entire city in these rooms that are really autonomous cars along paths that are optimized for that type of technology. The point here isn't that autonomous vehicle technology is going to be kick-ass. It is, but for the purposes of this discussion, what I really want to talk about is the next step in any logical thought process. Unfortunately, the way entertainment and the way news media and the way our communication channels are really set up, they incentivize us to speak as concisely as possible. Most people read the headline, they look at the image, maybe they look at a pull quote. Beyond that, they don't take in any particular information. And as a result of that, we are kind of incentivized to think in a very surface level, just to think as a very thin film atop of the deep ocean of potential thoughts that we have. And so what that means is that when we're presented with the idea of an autonomous car, what we think of is, okay, it's a car that drives itself. But the deep ocean thinking process of that is to say, it's a car that drives itself. How does that impact the size, shape, operability, cost, business model behind the vehicle itself? How does that affect the energy market and the way that we fuel it? How does that affect the way that our cities are designed, urban planning wise? How does that affect the way that we go to work? If the commute disappears, or if we just step out of our home into another building essentially, why do we even have to leave our homes to begin with? Why do we even need cities to begin with? If suddenly these buildings are moving around constantly, why don't we just build a bunch of homes that are always moving and can orient themselves algorithmically? Like, there's so many different paths that we can take with any of these thought processes, so many different ways that we can try to predict and maybe even in some cases influence the way things that actually end up going, and consequently be prepared for it or help other people prepare for it. It's this type of thinking that is unfortunately far too scarce. It's absolutely out there, and if you look around and if you actually read the entire content of a long form article or read an entire book, it's very easy to come up with. But unfortunately, this type of thinking is very difficult to convey concisely. It's very difficult to convey with a Snapchat, that type of thought process. But I think that if we are going to continue to be prepared for these types of things, and ideally continue to be engaged and get more and more voices included in the conversation about the direction that these things go, we need to figure out a way to communicate these ideas, and to do it very consistently, and to do it ideally in an entertaining and interesting way, otherwise nobody's going to want to participate. And so one of the great challenges that we have today is to take some of these cool technologies that we have, some of the cool devices and software and apps and networks, and figure out a way that we can keep them from becoming increasingly more reductive, so that the depth is not destroyed and completely varnished over before we have an opportunity to tap into it and see what's actually there, and to add our own 2 cents as well. So we have to imagine, and in order to imagine, we have to be able to aggregate a lot of different types of information. And then ideally on top of that, and this is the real point that I want to make, we have to figure out increasingly clever and contagious ways to share that information. I suspect that all the pieces that we need to solve this particular puzzle are already there. We just need to get out there and use them correctly. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, you can give it a like, you can subscribe to my channel, you can share it with a friend, you can leave a comment below if you would like to ask a question for me to answer in a future video. You can find out more about me and my work at colin.io, my blog at exilelifestyle.com, my podcast website is letsknowthings.com, and you can find me pretty much everywhere on the internet at Colin is my name. As soon as you sit down to record, it's dogs, it's sirens, it's loud motorcycles.